education director. And as you just saw, we're going to record this so that we can share it with other people. And I want to thank, first of all, before I introduce our two speakers tonight, not only all of you for being here, but also Alana Yanelli from Lakes Environmental Association for hosting this via Zoom for us and recording it and being my tech backup, because a lot of people know I need a tech backup. And I'd also like to thank Maggie Lynn from Loon Land Trust for helping make an invite via Facebook and for promoting the program, and Amy St. Germain from Upper Saco Valley Land Trust also for promoting this program. So I think we have people from all of our organizations here, and we love to collaborate. And I want to get started right now. So this is about the emerald ash borer, which is in our area. We always thought it was out there somewhere, but it's here. And our two speakers tonight will be Colleen Teerling, and she is a forest entomologist for the state, and Jan Santerre, who is a program director, and I probably messed up your last name there, Jan, sorry, a program director for Project Canopy. So I'm just going to let them take it from here. Thank you. And if you have questions, you can put them in the chat. Sorry, Colleen. You can put them in the chat, and then we will also have a Q&A at the end.
Okay, so I'm going to just a sec here. In the bark or underneath the bark. Okay, can you see my screen now? I have a short video to show you, just sort of showing some of the signs and symptoms of emerald ash borer, and then I will get into my presentation. So I'm just going to go back. Hopefully you guys can see this. If you can't, somebody shout out to me.
We can see it.
Okay. And are you hearing it?
Yes.
Hi, I'm Colleen Teerling, and I'm an entomologist with the Maine Forest Service, and I work with emerald ash borer.
Colleen, the video's not working.
Okay. Can you see it but not hear it?
Cannot see it. We can see your slideshow.
Okay, hang on.
Okay.
Well, I'm just going to stop sharing and start sharing again. Okay. You see a picture now of me in front of a tree?
Yes.
Okay, let's try that again. Thank you. Hi, I'm Colleen Teerling, and I'm an entomologist with the Maine Forest Service, and I work with emerald ash borer. Emerald ash borer is spreading from the southernmost part of the state and the northernmost part of the state where it is established. When you see this kind of woodpecker feeding, it usually is due to emerald ash borer. So when woodpeckers feed on insects in the bark or underneath the bark, they often will flick off the outer bark, and this leaves the bright blonde inner bark visible. And in ash trees, this becomes a very distinctive pattern and is easy to see as the bright blonde bark shows up against the darker outer bark. If you can peel back the bark enough to see what kind of insect galleries or tracks there are, or any insects that are available, you should be able to tell whether it's emerald ash borer or some other species. So emerald ash borer galleries are sinuous S-shaped galleries. When there's only one or two emerald ash borer, you can easily see that typical S-shaped gallery. When there's a lot of emerald ash borer, they tend to crisscross over each other, and you just see a maze of galleries. If the woodpeckers are feeding on native bark beetles, which overwinter in the bark, the holes usually only go partway down the bark. So if you peel back the bark and the hole stops partway through the bark, then you know it is not emerald ash borer. So we are not looking for deep woodpecker holes like these pileated woodpecker holes. We're looking more for surface feeding just under the bark. When you're out walking in your woodlot in the winter, there are several signs and symptoms of emerald ash borer that you can be looking for. The woodpecker feeding damage is probably the most commonly seen one in Maine, but there are also other things like epicormic growth or water sprouts. We also sometimes will see cracks in the bark. This is because as the EAB feeds underneath the bark tends to dry out and crack. If you have any questions or would like to learn more about emerald ash borer, go to our website. If you are in an area where emerald ash borer is not known to be, if you see any of these signs and symptoms, please give us a call. Thanks a lot for helping us monitor for emerald ash borer.
Okay, I'm going to stop sharing and now start sharing my presentation. Okay, can you see my slides now?
Yes.
Okay. Thanks for your patience. So as I said, I'm Colleen Teerling. I'm one of the entomologists for the Maine Forest Service, and emerald ash borer is one of the insects that I work with. So I just want to talk to you guys a little bit about not about everything with EAB because we can't even begin to cover all that, but a little bit about biological control, a little bit about how we're monitoring for it. But first, I thought I'd start with where EAB is in Maine. So we found it first way up here in Madawaska in Upper Aroostook County. This is a fairly small infestation still, even though we found it first. It's far up north. So far, we're still in a 2-year life cycle. So the population is growing much more slowly than it is further south, where it gets into a 1-year life cycle pretty quickly. It also was a small point infestation. So there are still relatively few beetles up there, and it's still spreading slowly. Down south, it's a completely different story. Down south, we are kind of at the leading edge of this massive front that's coming in from Massachusetts and New Hampshire and basically the entire eastern half of the US. And so the numbers are much higher. And even though EAB tends to start out when it first attacks trees and the numbers are really low, it starts out as a 2-year life cycle. Once the trees start to get stressed and the population builds up and the numbers of EAB build up, they overwhelm the tree a little faster and they can speed up and they will go into a 1-year life cycle. So all of a sudden, the numbers of EAB just build up faster and faster. So this shows you here the pink crosshatched area is the quarantine area, and the blue is an emergency order area. So that's basically just, the same rules as a quarantine, but it's something that we can enact quickly without going through all of the public hearings and the cost and the expense and the time that it takes us to change the quarantine. So it's just sort of like a temporary quarantine, this emergency order. And as we expand the quarantine, that will, the emergency order will become part of the quarantine area. So what the quarantine involves is basically, a quarantine is a way of trying to slow down the spread of emerald ash borer. And so to try to reduce the amount of EAB or any invasive species that is moved while still allowing trade and economic various things to occur. So without completely shutting everything down. And so what this means is that if you have ash and you want to sell your ash products or move your ash products out of the quarantine zone, if you are in the quarantine zone, you want to move them outside the quarantine zone, you need a compliance agreement with the state, and the person that you're shipping them to also will have a compliance agreement. And that basically just means that you will do certain things to try to reduce, you agree to do certain things to reduce the chance of EAB being spread with your wood products. And the person on the other end will also agree to do things to reduce the spread. So that may be even just things like cutting your timber in the winter and shipping it in the winter when EAB does not fly, and the person receiving it may say, okay, yes, we will agree to process this or burn it or chip it or whatever we're doing before May 1st, before EAB starts to fly. So it's just allowing trade to occur without, while still reducing the chances of spreading EAB. It's not perfect. It doesn't stop EAB, but it does seem to slow it down. So some of the things that are involved are ash, not mountain ash, just true ash, roundwood, green lumber, chip material with ash, hardwood, firewood that has not undergone certified heat treatment, and then rooted ash. There's actually nothing you can do to ash nursery stock to make it legal to send it across the quarantine line. Once you're inside the quarantine zone, it is legal just to move stuff around anywhere, ash around anywhere. However, we would really like people to not move it from areas of known infestations to other areas within the quarantine zone, because there's a lot of areas that don't have EAB yet. Even down in York County, which has been fairly, heavily infested for quite a while, there's still lots of places where EAB does not exist. And so there are things that you can do to try to reduce the chances of moving it around, and we're just basically trying to slow down the spread of EAB. And so some of these things, some of these best management practices are to grind or chip or burn or compost the ash tree waste materials. Just deliver your ash tree material, whether it's firewood or other things, within 5 miles of its origin. That means, if your tree is infested, you're not sending infested wood a long distance away. It's still within 5 miles. It's not that big a deal. Or you can transport the ash wood after October 1st to be used at its destination before May 1st of the following spring. That means that EAB is going to be inside the wood and not out flying and being spread around. Other things to do are cut and season the ash for a year, or at least over the summer before you distribute it. And in all cases, if you are moving ash, you should still, in good conscience, notify the recipients that there is a chance that your wood is infested with EAB. It's coming from an area that's infested with EAB, and that they cannot move it outside of the regulated zone, and that it should be processed as soon as possible. So those are some of the things that people in infested areas can do to help just reduce the chances of EAB spreading. How we look for EAB, there's no really great way of looking for EAB. There's no pheromone trap that'll draw it in for a mile, like the spongy moth, which used to be known as gypsy moth. We don't have any real silver bullet. So there's a lot of different things we do. One of the things we do is a girdle trap trees. And this is probably one of the better methods that landowners and land managers can use. And what is involved is basically you sacrifice a tree. Where's my cursor here? You peel the bark off from around the tree. The tree stays alive all summer, but it's stressed, and that particular sort of stress will make it more attractive to emerald ash borer. It will draw EAB in just from the surrounding area, from neighboring trees. It doesn't draw it in from any great distance. So if EAB is not in the area, it's not going to draw it into an area. But if it is, in that neighboring area, or within a few trees away from it, EAB are going to sort of leave those trees and go to that trap tree, preferentially. And then in the fall, we cut down the tree and peel it. We have these roving log peeling workshops. The last few years, we've been doing them outdoors rather than indoors. And we have landowners and our staff, and a wide variety of people come and help us peel the trees, and we look for signs of emerald ash borer. And so this is a pretty good way of looking for EAB, and we're always looking for people who are interested in hosting a trap tree. And I know that you guys are doing some trap trees. We found it, well, actually, let me go on first before I go to that. The other thing we do is we have some traps we have purple traps, which we get from the federal government. And those purple traps need to be placed outside the quarantine zone. But we also have a number of these green funnel traps. And Jan could probably may talk a little bit more about this, but we have a lot of landowners that will put up, and some of the land trusts will have done this, put up these green funnel traps. They need to be processed every couple of weeks and the insects collected. And then we look at them at the end of the season. And these are ones that are available for landowners and land managers. And you guys did that last year and found an EAB on one of your properties. And we thought it might be a good spot for biological control, but it turns out it wasn't. So this coming year, we're probably going to be putting in a trap tree and maybe some green funnel traps as well. And let's see. Okay, well, yes. Sorry, I've the top of my slide is covered up here. I couldn't read my heading. Woodpeckers. So woodpeckers are better at finding EAB than we are. Often the first visual signs that we'll see before we see some of the things I talked about in that video, before we see the bark cracks and the crown starting to die back, we will see woodpecker feeding because they find it before we do. And they will sometimes feed on native beetles. And so if you can, as I showed up there, peel back the bark and expose any galleries and send in pictures of anything that you see underneath the bark, I can identify it just from a picture of the insect tracks. And the other thing that I mentioned was, how deep the holes go. If the holes are just in the surface of the bark, then it's just and if you sort of peel that back and before you even get down to underneath the bark, the holes just disappear, then it's just a native bark beetle. But if it goes down to the cambium layer underneath the bark and you see those galleries that I showed you, then that's what you need to take a picture of and send to me, and I can identify whether it's emerald ash borer or whether it's something else. Because sometimes ash trees will get stressed, and some of our native insects that sort of specialize in sort of jumping on trees that are dying, they will come in and colonize that tree, and it looks really bad. And it can look like emerald ash borer if you're not really familiar with what the tracks look like, but I should be able to identify it. And so there are some of the galleries, a little sort of closer picture. If there's just a small number of EAB, you can really see that S-shaped gallery here, very distinctive. When you get a whole lot of them, they just crisscross all over the place, and it's a little trickier to identify them. And here's a picture of the adult emerald ash borer. They're small. You see when they're sitting on a penny, often people see really high resolution close-up pictures of emerald ash borer and they think it's big. And then when I show them what an actual EAB looks like, they say, oh, that's really tiny. And tiger beetle is another metallic green insect that is often mistaken for EAB. It often is on the ground and it's a very active hunter. It's a great insect. And if you walk towards it, it will often just fly up or jump up and sort of fly ahead for 20 feet and then land. And then you walk towards it, it'll jump up and fly again. And if you see that kind of behavior, then you're pretty sure it's a tiger beetle and not emerald ash borer. So biological control. I think one of the questions that somebody sent in prior to the talk was, but woodpeckers, are they good to have? Answer is absolutely yes. Woodpeckers are one of the best biological control agents in the early stages of an infestation. We do release biological control agents, but we're releasing them in really small numbers, and it takes a lot of years for those to build up. But woodpeckers, they're already out there. And early in an infestation, when the numbers of EAB are low, they actually can do a good job of keeping the population suppressed. They can't do that forever. They can only do that in the early stages of an infestation. Once the EAB really get going, they kind of overwhelm what the woodpeckers could do in terms of control. But early on, they do a really good really good job of controlling. They can cause over 90% of mortality of EAB in individual trees. The problem is they don't necessarily go and get every tree. They tend to find a really good tree and they'll just hammer that and get every single EAB out of that tree, which is good for that one tree. And so some of the other things we have for biological control, there are 3 tiny little parasitic wasps. People hear the word wasp and they think yellow jacket, and that's not what we're releasing. These are wasps that cannot sting. What you would think of as their stinger is really just an egg layer, an ovipositor, and it is not used for defense. It's only used for laying eggs. They're very, very tiny. You think of how big the EAB is here sitting on a penny. Then you look at how tiny those parasites are. They're really, really tiny. Chances are none of you will ever see them unless you're involved in releasing them, because they will go out in the forest and nobody will ever see them again. And even us who are looking for them have a hard time finding them, because they just go out and they spend all of their lives underneath the bark of the ash tree, with a very short exception when they go out finding new EAB to lay eggs. So that tiny little spot on the edge of the cap is actually an egg parasite. So there it is. It's tiny, tiny, tiny. It's smaller than an emerald ash borer egg, and emerald ash borer eggs are so small that they're exceedingly hard to see. So that's one of the parasites. This one is Trashticus Fenese, and it's a parasite of the larvae. It's pretty small. It has a very short ovipositor, so it's good at controlling EAB on the tops of the trees where the bark is thinner, and on younger trees that have thinner bark. But it doesn't do much for protecting the older trees. So there's a slightly larger one. This one's about the size of, maybe a mosquito or so, or the size of a midge. And it's got a longer ovipositor. You can see it over here. You can probably see that's its ovipositor there. It's almost as long as the body. So it can actually lay its eggs through the thicker bark. So the larvae are underneath the bark, tunneling away. And these insects are so good at feeling with their feet where the larva is, that they can sort of scissor that ovipositor through the bark and lay their egg right in the larva. It's pretty amazing. And so both of these are good at establishing. We know they can establish, we know they can spread and follow emerald ash borer. And we do know that that they are we originally thought, we were telling people, don't expect, even though we're releasing these biological control agents, don't expect them to save the trees that are out there now. Those trees are probably going to die, but the younger trees growing up, those will hopefully be protected. And that's still sort of the case, and that's still what we're telling people. But there are some papers that are coming out now that are saying, against all expectations, in some of the release sites, some of the younger trees are being protected by the small one, Trashticus Fenese, and some of the older trees, pole size and even slightly larger, are being saved at the biocontrol release sites by the Spathius gallinae, which surprises us. And we don't know. We're certainly not guaranteeing that this is going to happen everywhere we release these wasps, but we do know that they have got the potential to save trees. The idea behind this is less that we're going to save these trees that are here right now at the release sites, and more that we are building up the numbers of these parasites. So we're releasing them just at the beginning of the infestation, when the population of EAB is just exploding, and there's EAB out there by the millions, and we're releasing just a few hundred or a few thousand of these wasps. But they have multiple generations a year, so they can build up numbers pretty quickly. And so we're hoping that they will build up their numbers. And then when a lot of the ash trees are starting to die and the EAB populations are starting to come down, then that's when we hope that these parasites will come into their own and they will be able to protect the trees. So protect trees that are left, protect trees that have some degree of resistance, and protect the next generation of trees that are growing up. I know there is often some concern about bringing in foreign insects to deal with the foreign insect, and are we bringing in something else that might become a problem in and of its own right? And I agree that in the past we have done some really, really stupid things in the name of biological control. You think of spongy moth, which is the new name for what we used to call gypsy moth. Back 100 years ago, when it was starting becoming a big issue in the eastern US, people went to Europe and just went out into the woods, and anything that attacked that moth, they collected it all and they dumped it in our woods. And we've brought back all sorts of things that attacked some of our native species, and things that we would never do that now. And so now, before we release any biological control agent, it has really rigorous tests. So it needs to be tested in the laboratory, and basically it's a test of, will it choose to feed on something else, or is it willing to die first? And so they're pretty rigorous about what we release out there, and they've been tested fairly rigorously. And we can't protect, I guess, against every eventuality. There's some possibility that something unexpected may happen, and these insects might start to feed on some other insects. If they do that, they would never feed on anything like bumblebees or even other beetles. The only thing that they could do is they might switch host to something very, very closely related to emerald ash borer. Say something like bronze birch borer, something in that same genus that is a pest of trees and it has the same habits. So that's a slight possibility. It's pretty unlikely, because these insects just don't even go to trees that are not ash trees. But it is, I guess, in theory possible. But there's been a lot of tests done. It's a pretty safe bet that these things are not going to be attacking anything other than EAB. With the exception of, there is one of these that actually does attack another invasive species that we don't have in Maine yet. I think it's out west in California. So if that one does come here, we'll have a good parasite ready to go for that. Just want to briefly mention some of the other things that can be done to treat trees for emerald ash borer. There are insecticides that can be used to treat individual trees, whether that's a trunk injection or a soil drench or just even a basal bark spray. They can protect landscape trees. It's something that will need to be done every few years for the near future. In the long run, once biological control numbers start to rise and once EAB numbers come down, they may need to be much less in the way of frequent applications. For towns, this is often something that's a lot cheaper than removing trees. Removing trees and replacing trees is a huge expense, and to go through and treat trees every few years might be much cheaper. And it can actually reduce the EAB density within an area. So if a town goes through and treats some of its trees, the remaining trees will live much longer because there's just less EAB out there. And now we're even starting to say, in a forest situation, it may be a good thing to start to choose some of the best trees and say, we're going to protect these trees so that we can keep ash seed on the landscape. In general, I am not for treating trees in the forest with pesticide, but I can see that this might be a worthwhile thing to do to keep some trees, some male and some female trees on the landscape until biocontrol gets to the point where these trees are protected, and that will keep seed and seedlings on the landscape. So that's something that people are starting to do. This information is available on our website. Some of the other things that can be done in areas, if you want to manage for emerald ash borer, is harvesting large trees. And the large trees are the ones that produce the most EAB, and harvesting these large trees before they die of emerald ash borer will give a landowner value. I know somebody had a question about, should they go through and cut all their trees, or cut all their ash trees? The answer is a resounding no, don't cut them all. We want to keep ash on the landscape as long as possible. However, if you are managing your woodlot for economic reasons and for lumber, for timber, then you might want to go through and cut your bigger ash trees that will give you the value, and leave some of the smaller ones there to maintain ash on the landscape. Girdled ash trees can also be part of a management program. And so girdling clusters of ash trees will act as a sink, especially in the early parts of an infestation. And you can girdle these trees. EAB will tend to go to those trees. You can cut those trees up and either take them out and cut them firewood, or just buck them up and leave them on the forest floor if you don't want to take them out. And they will dry out enough that most of the EAB in those trees will die. And so you are basically just sort of sucking EAB out of the environment into those trees and then taking those trees out. And so that is also part of a management plan for early infestation. And so doing a number of these things can actually slow down EAB by about 10 or 15 years. You can delay that peak of emerald ash borer, death and destruction by about 10 or 15 years if you want to gain more time for growth of timber, or if you want to try to keep your trees alive for a little bit longer. So those are some things that can be done. And this is a little bit more geared towards towns, but it is something to think about. Do you know where your ash trees are? Do you know where EAB might be coming in, where firewood might be coming in? Are you doing detection? And yes, you guys are. And then do you have a bit of a plan of what you might do once EAB is here? We have a lot of information on our website, and feel free to go and use any of that. And questions? I'm not sure what the time is.
Colleen, one question just came up from Ann Williams. When using wood chips for, say, trail maintenance, how can you be assured that it doesn't contain ash?
Okay, you froze there, so I didn't hear that question.
Okay, let's try again. When using wood chips for trail maintenance, how can you be assured that it doesn't contain ash?
You would have to trust who you got it from, and if it's coming, if you are outside the quarantine zone, then you need to trust that you need to be sure that if somebody is sending it to you from inside the quarantine zone, that they're respecting those rules. Otherwise, yeah, just talking to who you get it from. And if you do chip them, if your chips are chipped so that they are less than 2 inches, I believe, in 2 dimensions, that's fairly safe for emerald ash borer.
That's the only question so far.
Oh, I guess I didn't, yeah, this last slide. So yeah, it is really important to keep ash on your landscape. We want to keep ash and ash seed on the landscape as long as possible to facilitate ash coming back as some component of the forest. Biocontrol will be way more effective. Well, it will only work if we have ash on the landscape. If you cut trees and there's no ash left, then there's nothing for EAB biocontrol to feed on, and just it will not get established. And research is starting to show that there's more resistance out there than we thought. There's one paper that said that 75% of white ash was still alive in the EAB core area. We're not seeing that everywhere, so don't count on that. but that does tell us that there's a lot we don't know yet, and that things are not quite as bleak as we originally thought, and we want to keep ash on our landscape. So for the person who is asking about should they cut all their ash trees, I would say no. If you have ash that are over your house, and you will probably want to have those trees cut before EAB, or before or soon after EAB comes to your area, because we do know that ash gets brittle as it dies and breaks up. And so you probably, that tree is right over your house is probably going to become a hazard tree. So you probably are going to want to cut that down at some point. But trees in your woodlot, you don't need to cut them down. And if you are maintaining a woodlot for timber, then yeah, you may want to cut EAB, or cut your ash trees before EAB comes through, cut your big trees. But if that's not your goal, don't cut your trees just because EAB is coming.
Here's another question. Can you hear me, Colleen?
Yes.
Okay. Sarah O'Neill asks, can you describe what appropriate heat treatment is for wood?
Off the top of my head, no. But if you go on our website, there is, we do have that information. It's a certain amount of you have to heat to a certain temperature for a certain amount of time to get to that, and then you can get a certification that it has been properly heat treated. The exact numbers I do not know off the top of my head, sorry.
That's okay. Mary Grace Barber asks, can you give us an idea of how species are distributed around the state's largest percentage to smallest?
So we do have 3 species, the 3 ash species I'm assuming you're talking about. We have black ash is largely, it's about the only ash tree we have way up in the northern part of Maine. In the southern part of Maine, we do have black ash, white ash, and green ash. White ash is, I think, our most common, and then I'm not sure green and black off the top of my head. I'm not sure which of those is most common. But they tend to be more towards the southern part of the state, not in the far north. Did that answer your question? Is that what you wanted? Or was there something else?
She wrote, what percentage is ash of all types?
I'll talk about that a little bit.
Okay, yes, that's it. Yeah.
Just briefly, yeah.
All right, thank you, Colleen. Shall we move on to Jan?
Okay. Let me, whoops.
Okay. All right, thanks, Colleen. And while I'm just switching over to my presentation here, my name is Jan Santerre, and I am the Urban and Community Forestry Program Coordinator for the Maine Forest Service, otherwise known as Project Canopy. And I have been in this position for, or with the program for roughly 20 years. So I've been around for a while and have been watching EAB make its slow march from the original detection site, I think out in Michigan, back around 2002. So sadly, we do now have EAB here in Maine, and we're all asking these questions about how to respond to it and what we can do to manage and minimize the impacts from this devastating pest here in Maine. So some of what Colleen presented, I'm going to reiterate as it delved a little bit into some of the management techniques that are used. But we'll emphasize a little bit more about planning for what you can do as a landowner. I mean, I understand that the land trusts are hosting this program, and we're talking about management on some of these land trust properties, easement properties, as well as owned properties, but also, many of you own land yourself and are asking these questions about what you can do. So most of what I'll talk about, for a municipality, it also applies to you as a landowner. Colleen listed and I think linked a lot of these resources, but the Maine Forest Service, DACF website does have an abundance of things that we have made available, including things like sample management plans for municipalities, guides for homeowners on what you can do, and kind of a triage type of management scheme for deciding on treating ash if you have landscape ash around your home or in your community. We have various different checklists, lists of licensed arborists, pesticide applicators, foresters, who are all qualified to provide guidance as well. Guidance for wood waste. Colleen talked fairly extensively about quarantine regulations. So there's guidance there for where wood waste can go to. And then we do have a couple of different information sheets at the Maine Forest Service on different management considerations for forest landowners as well. So, and then I would say most importantly, we have links to our contacts, contact information for people like Colleen, myself, for our district foresters, planners that we have here in Augusta, and educators that are available to help answer your questions. And these are all taxpayer benefits that you've already paid for. So please avail yourselves of these resources. We're here to help. And particularly for private landowners, you have district foresters that cover the state. And I think where many of you are hailing from in this area around Bridgeton, Lovell, you're kind of at a nexus between several of our district foresters. So you would probably be looking to either Shane Dugan, who covers the Bridgeton area, Mike Richard, who is in Lovell and Oxford County, and then to the south, I think some of you are also coming from York County. Oliver Markowitz is in that York County area, and all really great people that can help provide advice, but also help connect you with other resources that are available. So this is a question I asked to municipalities, but again, as a private landowner, these are things that you want to consider too. Are you ready? Do you know what you have on your land? Do you know if you have ash trees? Do you know if they're male or female ash trees? In a community or with an organization, what is your capacity to respond to this growing infestation? Do you have stewards and volunteers that are capable of going out and identifying and doing inventory of your resources? Do you have any policies as an organization as to what you might be able to do? And many organizations have strict policies against utilizing any sorts of chemical treatments on their properties. That's a very, very real consideration for the land trust community to think about. And in those policies, do you have any carve outs for things like invasive pests or invasive plants? Like, what's your staffing capacity? Who are the consultants that are in your area? Pesticide applicators, arborists, loggers, foresters, who might be available to help you. And then a question, certainly from a community perspective, are there any emergency management considerations that might need to be taken into consideration? A lot of big ash trees particularly are along our roads and can pose a very serious risk if they become severely infested. So, and Colleen did mention too, that once trees do become severely infested with EAB and are on the brink of failure, they take on a slightly different composition than a regular tree that has just died of other natural causes. EAB causes ash to almost like desiccate, and it becomes a very dangerous tree to take down once it has been severely compromised by EAB. And then other things, that all of you can consider, what's your timeline? In this particular area, we found one EAB and one trap in Lovell at Sabatis Mountain. And then of course we have a small infestation, but a slightly larger over in Bridgeton, right off 302. So what's your timeline? Part of your timeline is understanding where the pest is and how severe it is in your area. Do you want to try to preserve significant ash? And if you do, those likely management techniques will be utilizing some of those chemical treatments. You want to make a plan for removals, again, on your own property that's not open to the public. You may want to remove trees that are in areas of higher risk along trails or woods, roads, those sorts of areas, so that you minimize any possibility that those trees could come down across those areas. Where you're going to send your wood once it gets disposed, firewood's a great way to use it just locally. And then again, if you're talking in a landscape situation, what replanting efforts you might make. So to the question about numbers of ash and how much ash we have in the state of Maine. This is a very number heavy graphic here, but a couple graphics here. It's the total number of ash trees by diameter class, and then the number of ash trees per acre in Maine. And this is not broken out geographically, but just by total numbers. And as you can see here, we have much larger numbers, as with any species, in those smaller diameter classes. And as you get into the larger diameter classes, those trail off significantly. But it's indicative of the fact that we have millions and millions of ash trees here in Maine. Overall composition, we do not have nearly as much ash as we do species such as maple or oak, but locally it can be very abundant. Colleen mentioned that black ash is more common in northern Maine, particularly along our waterways. Similarly, green ash, also kind of a water loving species. You may find it locally fairly abundant in some swamps and along rivers. But overall total composition of all trees in Maine, ash is only roughly 2 to 4% of our overall forest composition here in the state. So relatively small in overall percentage, but when you look at the numbers, we're still talking millions and millions of trees. And then just again, because I'm the urban forester, I have to say, in some local communities, you may have very significant amounts of ash. Ash was a very common replacement when we lost our elms, and therefore in some places we did not learn our lesson that a monoculture was not a good idea, and we replanted with the same problem that we created another problem by replanting with exclusively ash. Any of you that have gone to the University of Maine, the mall at the University of Maine is a great example. It's almost exclusively ash. So we have EAB. One of the reasons that we do these programs is to really get the public involved and help us to understand where EAB is, as well as how severe it is. So, I certainly encourage all of you, if you're not already volunteering, to consider reaching out to Colleen, myself, or any of us at the Forest Service, and possibly offering up a trap tree on your own property, monitoring one of those green funnel traps, or working with your local land trust to help with doing things like inventory or some early management Colleen already talked about all of these things. You know, these are kind of the 4 pillars of our management tools that we have going for us here in Maine. One of the things that we're learning is, and it's hard sort of to think in these terms, you know, we really want to minimize the pest and minimize the damage that the pest does, but we're not going to eradicate EAB. It is going to be here with us. And so we need to flip our mindset a little bit and think about the fact that we are managing the forest, and we're managing the forest to be the healthiest forest that it can be. We're not going to be able to manage the insect. So we're utilizing these tools, targeted ash removal, doing some insecticide treatment, absolutely very much relying on that biological control, which we're hearing from all of our counterparts in areas where EAB is much more well established, is a very effective tool at managing and keeping those numbers at a level that the ash trees can actually survive. So manage the forest and manage it to be the healthiest it can be. Again, I don't need to talk much more about the targeted ash removal. If you are a landowner who has been managing for ash timber and you have a planned entry coming up soon and you're in an area that is already infested or within 10 miles of an infestation, you definitely do want to think about harvesting that merchantable timber at this point. It's not to say you should be doing a diameter limit cut and cutting everything over a certain diameter, because you're then impacting the overall forest health. You're impacting the forest ability to recover, to produce seed and to create that next generation of ash, which is a very important ecological species. But to harvest a good number of your merchantable ash trees is a wise decision. And, you know, it's also in a municipal setting, it's a wise decision even outside of that EAB area to start making that transition to other trees sooner rather than later, so that you can do that on your own terms, on your own timeline, and within your own budget too. Once EAB is there and it starts really causing a lot of mortality, it can be a very expensive proposition to try to remove all of those trees in a time frame before they become a risk.
Dan?
Yes.
A question for you from
Yeah.
Mary Grace Barber. How
Sure.
does the infestation compare to the woolly Adelgid?
I'm
I
going
can
to hold
take a
on.
go.
I'm going to hold off on that one and let Colleen, or maybe
Yeah,
we
I can take that after when you're finished.
yeah, and I'll try to, I think, well, we've still got a few minutes. So I just have a couple more slides here. And Colleen talked about slowing the spread. I mean, these are just some good best management practices, again, you know, related to our quarantine, which Maine is one of the few states in the east that actually does still maintain a quarantine. Most of the states to our west don't maintain quarantines, but we want to, you know, keep your wood local. If you're cutting your own wood, you know, make sure you're selling the firewood locally, or selling your timbers locally. You've got to follow those quarantine rules. Harvest timing might be a consideration between the flight and non-flight season. From October through really early May is non-flight season. So you have a little bit more flexibility with your harvest and moving things around, as long as things are processed within a timely, within that time period. And then again, promoting diversity and overall forest health. Again, you know, forest landowners, first thing I would do if you're considering any sort of management for EAB, it would be to consult with your district forester. Your district forester can provide recommendations. They can point you to some of these resources that are available. They can also point you towards working with a licensed consulting forester that is a good match with you. Not every forester is a good match with every landowner, and our district foresters have a good sense of the realm of foresters that are out there, and they can help you narrow down those possibilities. You absolutely, if you have ash in your woods, you want to start planning now. Again, during timber harvest, you want to take steps to remove some of that sawlog quality ash. And as Colleen pointed out, you don't want to cut that young ash. You want to maintain ash on the landscape because there is a distinct possibility that as we are releasing biocontrol, as we're learning more, that we are going to be able to win at this fight. I mean, it looked pretty grim when 20 years ago we first started seeing what was happening here, but we have so many more tools now available to us, and Maine really, I think, is lucky that we've been able to learn from the infestations that they've been through to our west, and we've been able to make the best of this negative situation by getting in early with the biocontrol releases and learning from all of the work that's been done in these areas. And then I just stuck this link in here. It's from the Forest Stewards Guild, and one of the researchers at the University of Vermont who's doing a lot of work with management of ash for woodland owners. His name's Tony D'Amato, and he's got this 10 recommendations for managing ash. And I thought it's a really good resource. And in fact, probably something that we're gonna try to add onto our website too. I'm not gonna talk anymore about this. Colleen already put that up. And just, I would say with next steps, again, inventory, you got to know what you have if you want to manage it. So know if you have ash, for one, and set a plan and start that process of what it is that you want to do. Weigh your cost benefits. And when I say cost benefits, we're not talking strictly dollar signs here. Ash has other intrinsic values, it has ecological values, it has social and cultural values. You have to weigh those in your cost benefit analysis too. And that those can be even more valuable than cutting the ash for firewood or for timber. And then lastly, monitoring. We wouldn't know that EAB was in Lovell if it weren't for the goodwill of the land stewards at Lovell Land Trust running a couple of traps last summer. So we're really grateful for them, that trap pulled out that one EAB, and that has triggered Colleen being able to make those assessments about whether these sites are good for biocontrol release, and will help this whole area, I think, once we do find EAB in some of these other areas, which have been determined to be good biocontrol release sites, to stay ahead of this pest and really position you guys really well. So super grateful for all of the volunteers that participated in that. And I shouldn't just shout out to Lovell Land Trust, because LEA and Loon Echo also ran some traps over at Pondicherry Park, which I think once we do find it there is going to be a good biocontrol release site. And I think we'll continue to do so in the coming field season. So if there's others, we really want to get these traps out. They're not too onerous to run, and it's extremely helpful to us. So thank you. That's all I have. I will stop sharing. There we go.
So there was that question just a minute ago, Colleen.
About how does EAB compare to the Adelgid,
Yes.
the Adelgid infestation? Yes. Interesting question. A few things. EAB is moving much faster than hemlock woolly adelgid is. It can move in firewood so easily. It's very cryptic and hidden. And also it flies. Hemlock woolly adelgid does not fly, at least not the stages that are viable in Maine. And so it tends to move less quickly. It will get blown on the wind. So it tends to be found along the coastlines, along rivers, gets moved by birds, but it doesn't move that far on its own. Hemlock woolly adelgid is also somewhat limited by cold winters. Our winters are getting less and less consistently cold with global warming, and certainly hemlock woolly adelgid is starting to move, inland and northwards. But at this point, it is still largely a coastal thing, and as it goes northwards, it develops less slowly, it spreads less slowly, and the populations build much more slowly. So also hemlock woolly adelgid will take years to kill a tree. In our climate, often trees will last 10, maybe even more years, whereas EAB, once it gets going, can kill a tree in 3 years. So those are some of the differences. EAB will eventually, almost without any doubt, spread throughout the entire state. Hemlock woolly adelgid, exactly how far north it goes will depend on exactly what climate change does. But in the near term, the far north we're expecting will not really have hemlock woolly adelgid. So those are some of the differences.
Super, thank you. There are 2 more questions, but first, Maggie from Luneco posted in the chat a link to District Forester. So if anyone's interested, that's available there. And then Bob and Pam ask, what is the Forest Service doing in their planned cuts? Are they taking ash or leaving it?
Leave that to you, Jen. I don't know what do we have planned cuts?
Well, one, the Maine Forest Service does not own and manage land.
Yeah.
Any land that is managed by the state of Maine is probably most are aware by our park public lands group, and then also Inland Fisheries and Wildlife does also own land. So, I would say with that information, the Maine Forest Service and the public lands foresters, we do educational programming with them, just as we are doing with all of you. And, they're taking this information and utilizing it to the best of their ability to manage ash on the landscape as well. So certainly, and with all of our state public lands, they're really intended to be managed at a much higher level than some of our other private lands in other parts of the state. So I would say they're doing a great job, and they are becoming all the more aware of the issues. One of our finds this past winter was with on one of our state public lands, and that was over in Gray, right, Colleen, on the Pineland unit. And it's a direct result, I would say, of our education and informing folks about what to look for. Our forest engineer, who is managing that wood timber harvest, was out snowshoeing and saw bark on the ground, on the snow. And that was his indication to look up, and he noticed the woodpecker activity and found, I think, a reasonably significant EAB infestation there in Gray. So that's what I know.
Okay. Sarah O'Neill asks, what are the risks of the insecticides that are used? Would some biological release be safer?
Good question. So the insecticides that are used are systemic. So they're generally either injected into the tree or they're sprayed right at the base of the tree and they go into the tree. So there's relatively little environmental contamination. It's not like something that's being broadcast sprayed. However, these insecticides will kill pretty much everything that's feeding on that ash tree. So it definitely has an impact. And as I said, I'm in general not a big fan of using pesticides in the forest. However, small scale targeted use may have a place in the forest. Certainly in towns, it is probably a good thing to use to keep trees, those trees on the landscape. It's not as if we will have to use these insecticides, every couple of years forever. You may have to spray every 2-3 years for the next 10 or 15 years. And then as the EAB population crashes, you might only need to treat a tree every, we don't know yet, but maybe every 10 years or so. And then eventually maybe not at all once the biocontrol gets kicked in. So it does have its place, and we're still sort of, I think, figuring out how integrated pest management will put together the use of pesticides and the use of biological control. Biological control, would it be safer? In some ways it would, because biological control only attacks emerald ash borer. It doesn't affect any of the other insects. The problem with biological control is that it's slow. Emerald ash borer is out there by the millions. We're releasing these biocontrol by the thousands. And it's just going to take years for those numbers to build up enough to have an impact. And so the pesticides can be somewhat of a short-term, keep the trees alive until the biocontrol can kick in. And so that's sort of how we're seeing it in the forest, and even in cities. It's probably, as much as I hate to admit it, it's probably has its place and can be a good thing. And the pesticides will do things that the biocontrol will not, in terms of having a quick and immediate action to keep those trees alive until the biocontrol gets out there and builds up. And are the biocontrols available to anyone or just to the state? Unfortunately, it's only available to the state. They are grown by the federal government, and they are given free of charge to the state. But we have to meet certain criteria in terms of this being a good site where these very precious resources will not be wasted, and they have the best chance of surviving. And then we also agree that we will go back in future years after releasing them to monitor them and make sure that, see if they've established and give back information and feedback on how they've established, because this is basically, it's a research project as well as a control project.
Do you see the last question?
Okay, we're similar resources for New Hampshire landowners. Yes, New Hampshire does have a good program. Off the top of my head, I think NH Bugs will probably, can you remember, Jan?
What their website is?
Yeah,
I'm not sure.
But
I know they
do have good resources.
Yeah, they've got great resources. Stephen Robert, I don't know how you say his last name, but I think with Cooperative Extension, they have a little bit of a different setup over there. But their district foresters are with Cooperative Extension, and they have some great resources too.
There you go, Maggie. Thank you. nhbugs.org.
They have a different setup when it comes to helping municipalities too. They actually, the state has purchased some of like the pesticide injection equipment, and they let municipalities use that when they purchase the equipment. So a little bit of a different setup. They always have been a little bit, more independent over there. But I didn't say it out loud, but Maine has resources to organizations, municipalities, etc., for providing financial assistance for some of this management, as well as some of the treatment options too. So, and can I before we go, I meant to point out one thing. Can I share my screen just once more, Lee?
Yes, certainly.
I'll do that real quick. So I don't know how big this tree looks on your screen, but I did want to point out that this is the state's largest white ash, and it's located in Waterford, so it's right in your backyards, and it's a magnificent tree. It's one of the biggest on the Maine Register of Big Trees, and it's also the only tree that is left on the Maine Register of Big Trees that's been there from the very beginning since 1968. So it's a doozy. It's magnificent. It's on Blackguard Road, and get out there and see it while you still can.
Alana says field trip.
Yes.
We'll organize one. That's awesome.
It's a gorgeous tree. And that, you know, to follow up on what Colleen was saying about insecticide treatments, you know, there are some just magnificent ash out there in our communities, in your yards, and to protect trees like that, I will make the leap to, like Colleen, I don't like using pesticides. I'm, you know, all organic, everything else, but when it comes to protecting a tree like that, you can never replace that. So again, you have to weigh what the cost benefit is in doing a treatment to try to protect a tree like that, which has so much value.
And I guess the other thing I should maybe mention, I maybe sort of alluded to this before, but it's not as if we will have to treat with pesticides forever. We do have an exit strategy, and that's the biological control. So our goal is to keep some trees alive until the biocontrol kicks in. So it's not forever. Treating pesticides will not be forever. I don't think I think if it was the case that we'd have to treat forever because there's no biocontrol in sight, I would say maybe just let them die. But we do have an end goal in sight.
Well, I want to thank you both, and again, the 4 organizations who co-hosted this. But this was so informative, as well as you give us a little glimmer of hope, which is really good. And I'm curious to see how we go forward and what we can do in our areas. And yeah, thank you for your time. And I think we all probably came away with a lot from this.
Well, thank you guys for hosting us. I appreciate it.
Yeah, indeed. And we look forward to working with all of you as we move forward.
Yeah, exactly. All right. Good night, everyone.